I want to thank all of you for coming, and especially those of you, many of you here, who have shown a lot of warmth and encouragement and support to the whole idea of the project from the beginning. So I'm really, really encouraged that it's actually, as it were, seems to be taking off. The aim is to create a program for storytelling in camps, detention centres, or so-called reception centres, where refugees, migrants, asylum seekers, whatever you want to call people arriving, are held, often for so many years that a child entering one of these suspension zones will be an adult when he or she leaves. Libraries Without Borders, which is one of the charities that I've been talking to try and have to collaborate perhaps, actually estimates the length of time, the average stay in the refugee camps across the world is 17 years. Of course, it's maybe skewed by the fact that some people have been in since 1948. So that figure may not be so representative of actual flux of migrations at the moment. So you could say that we actually need to mount an argument for the cultural rights of those held in such conditions. They have UN-covered rights to shelter, water, warmth, protection, environment. But the actual idea of the life of the mind is not covered in the UN Convention. But it's not only that, as it were, leader idea. The idea is to seed story. Do come in. So the idea is to seed stories in every form and really every medium. So though these two workshops in Oxford are literary and word-based, that's not the only medium the project is looking at. We're also quite interested in film, really any way of getting narrative out, circulating through the society. Another venture of a similar kind is called Refugee Tales, which Alice Smith is involved in, and it's happening in Kent. I've only got one flyer, unfortunately, but it's a walk in Canterbury in the footsteps of Chaucer, and so it has a similar idea of narrative and refugees. They call it working towards a language of welcome, as opposed to the language that we hear from most of the political discussion. I heard Chomsky speak not that long ago, named Chomsky, the philosopher, and one of the questions from the floor, because he got a prize for his language studies, which are extremely technical neuroscientific studies, and he's been a famous actor as well as an artist, and he got a question from the floor as to how he reconciled, not necessarily it doesn't matter. So it doesn't really matter. And so Chomsky was asked from the floor how he managed to reconcile his two interests, this extremely abstruse, incomprehensible to most people, not technical, psycholinguistic, and his activism that there should be rights for all people. And he said, reflected, it's wonderful to watch him because what you see and think. And he reflected for a while, and he said, well, the philosophers in the 18th century thought about what a man was. He said man and woman, what the species is. And he said what is distinctive, what we came to realize, and what was distinctive about the species was that we have complex language. And that it is therefore, so he was interested in that complexity of language. The philosopher came up with the next step they took was, of course, human rights. It was the philosopher who devised, Rousseau and so on, devised ideas of tolerance and ideas of equality and social justice and so forth. Whatever we think about the way they modelled it, they were concerned with that. And he said that was because they understood that this unique capacity of reasoning through language needed to be fostered in every human being. We had the right to achieve our full capacity. And that struck me as really, something that is the ground of this right that people in the camps have, that they must be allowed to reach their full potential as expressive users of language. I'm not saying they won't spontaneously. I don't want to be patronizing. It's just that it's very hard under those conditions if you're not given permission. And since Chomsky's work, I think, is slightly kind of picked up a bit by Terence Cave in his new book, Thinking with Literature. And I'll just read you a little passage from it, because Chomsky is here, and he's a French scholar, and he has got very interested in cognitive studies for literature. And he says, human cognition is alert, attentive, responsive. Above all, it is imaginative. It can think beyond the constraints of immediate experience, do strange things with words, conjure up futures and histories of all kinds, bring to life people who never existed, and invent for them plausible stories and environments. Despite the tangible evidence that this is so, the word cognition has traditionally been used to refer to the rational, knowledge-seeking processes of the mind, as opposed to other modes of engagement with the world. So he takes it a step further, which in a sense, though the philosophes in France used a lot of imaginative writing to put this argument, put their arguments about human rights, they didn't actually underline imagination as a thinking tool. So that's what Terence Cave is doing. He's saying we can think with imagination. And then what also cognitive studies have shown is that the faculties that have traditionally been separated, memory, fantasy, imagination, and reason, are not at all separate in the way we actually think. The mind, when we analyze it scientifically, is actually working with these supposed separate faculties all the time. So one underlying impulse in this idea for these workshops and for this project is that, and I said this yesterday, so forgive me those of you who were there yesterday, is that the traditional and the personal, the fictive and the true historic, the fantastic and the remembered, have always been interwoven to rich and wonderful effect. And the current forensic emphasis on true testimony, which is absolutely necessary for legal purposes. If you want to get papers, you have to be seen to be speaking the truth about your circumstances, regardless of whether you are, but the way you tell your story has to be persuasive in that way. This runs the risk of thinning narrative resources and expression from which the country of words is built. So now language variety, as I said, means that the performing arts, it's not just the actual written word as a text, but the performing arts, some of them very old, such as recitation, puppetry, and mime, are vital to communications and cross-language borders. You can do a great deal with the voice, as well as gesture, if you do have difficulties with language barriers. So I just want to quote something from Robin Robertson, who I just discovered has become Alice Oswald's editor. Do come in, do come in. I think we need to get a few more chairs. There's one chair here, and there's one there. Yeah, but I think, if I do want to just... So wait, we got that. Anyway, so Robin Robertson translated Medea. And of course, they're one of the extraordinary features of our times, that the Greek myths and the Greek tragedies are being revisited and reworked and retold by so many gifted writers, as well as other myths. You will hear a lot of marvellous work today in that vein. But anyway, Robin Robertson, in his translation of Medea, has a chorus at the beginning, say when Medea is totally distressed and weeping for for Jason's abandonment of her. If only we could charm her with music. But those old composers were such fools. They wrote melodies only for the happy times, festivals, grand banquets, celebrations. None of them thought to make a music for real life. Music that would salve our wounds and soothe our bitter griefs. We need a tune when there's no food to eat. So what I think of here is that literature is a tune. And many stories are like tunes. You can set them to a different form. You could set them as a symphony, you could set them on a whistle pipe, on a whistle, you can move them into the comic register if you want, and so forth. The tune Greensleeves will play in that in the same way as Medea, or the Trojan Women, or Gilgamesh will play in the new retelling. So now I'm going to introduce Philip. But actually, just before I introduce, I have one very important thing to say. In September, we're going to continue this work in Palermo, where refugees have been arriving for over 2 decades in the current crisis, and many more before, of course, and where they have vast reception centres, the largest in Europe, has more miners, I think, than anywhere else in Europe too. And we're trying to put together a kit in material and virtual form to furnish a social space where storytelling of every kind would prosper. And it could be a kind of story box. This is a phrase that Ben Harity used. Replicable, i.e. reproducible, light, cheap, which could be distributed, could be copied and distributed. And Libraries Without Borders, and we have a representative here today, have an ideas box, which is a pedagogical one, it's educational. So it's not entertainment. This is my project is about entertainment. But we could possibly bolt on to them. And it partly could be also a digital resource. And that's beginning already with the workshop and the filming. So, but before I want to introduce Philip, I just want to introduce Chelsea, who is Chelsea Gotchai, who is the representative of our very generous funding sponsor, the Metabolic Studio. Thank you again very much. So now, Philip Terry is my dear friend, dear comrade in arms from the University of Essex, where we created many creative writing courses together. He is a fiction writer as well, but has increasingly come to write poetry. He is, I think he will explain to you, a Lipian. I'll leave that to him to explain. He's about to publish a book called Cornets, which is using, and it's very interesting from the point of view of our workshop because it's a new form of sonnet invented by Reynolds. So he actually created a new shape. Yesterday, those of you who came to the Arabic workshop will have heard a lot about shape and the portability of shapes. And so this is a new shape, and Philip is the first writer in English of this form, this sonnet form. He also has a pamphlet coming out of versions, retellings, reworkings of Du Boulay, his famous series of laments, History of State. It's coming out with Oystercatcher Press. It is out from Oystercatcher Press as a small pamphlet called Du Boulay, and it will come out as a book called Bad Times. Philip.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Marina. Just checking who was going to have that. Yes, please do. Yes. Well, thanks, Marina. Thanks, Matthew, for organising this wonderful and really inspiring and really necessary event, which brings experiments of storytelling together with important things about human rights. So I'm just going to get us going gently today. I'll be talking for about 20-25 minutes and then reading to you for about the same amount of time, and then there'll be time for questions. And what I'll be talking about is a strange version of Gilgamesh I've done. So it's a version of the oldest epic that we're aware of, and it's a version in a kind of business English. So I'll say a little bit about that now. So a little bit of talking, then a little bit of reading poetry, and then some questions. And you should all have a handout which just has some of the quotes I'm going to mention on it. Okay? So can you all hear me? Okay. So translating or versioning, which is something we're going to be talking about today, translating or versioning Gilgamesh using a 1500 word vocabulary which is globish. This comes from the words global and English, so sort of global English, put together by Jean-Paul Nerrière for business communication purposes, and which he considered would become the world dialect of the third millennium. Translating Gilgamesh into this may at first glance look like a slightly peculiar thing to do and a slightly arbitrary thing to do. On one level, it is peculiar and arbitrary, but on another level, there's a kind of logic underpinning what I'm doing here, and so there's a method in the madness, or there's a logic underpinning this experiment in translation. And before I read you some extracts, I just want to explain to you what that logic is and how I came to this. A lot of people say about Oulipo, which I'll say a little bit about later, that they're interested in their work is arbitrary. It's not at all the case. It's quite the opposite is true. Generally speaking, with Gilgamesh, you have two kinds of people publish versions in English of Gilgamesh, and they're people who either know cuneiform, the original script in which this was written, and people who don't. Whichever kind of translator you're dealing with, there are two common tendencies also that you can observe. Firstly, there's a tendency as new excavations and chance discoveries unearth new clay tablets in cuneiform to increasingly fill in gaps in the story where previous lines and sometimes whole chunks of narrative have been missing. So Andrew George, for example, writes, "In time, the holes that pepper the standard version of the epic will undoubtedly be filled by further discoveries of tablets in the ruined mounds of Mesopotamia and in the museums of the world." Secondly, there's a tendency to translate not into something that anyone would recognise as living English, but into a sort of translatese, which is there's a tendency to translate into. It's partly to do with a question of fidelity, but it becomes a very formal, flat, and kind of neutral kind of English, which has a disembodied sense to it sometimes. It's basically very unidiomatic English. And so one could give lots of examples of this. I'll give you two. Andrew George's version, which is in many ways exemplary and scholarly translation, and he's written quite a lot about this too, and he's working from cuneiform tablets, or he's working from transcriptions of the tablets. Here's an example of his work from lines 67 to 70 of Tablet 1. "The young men of Uruk he harries without warrant." This is on your handout. "The young men of Uruk he harries without warrant. Gilgamesh lets no son go free to his father. By day and by night his tyranny grows harsher. Gilgamesh, the guide of the teeming people." Now that bit in square brackets and italics, the guide of the teeming people, that's an indication of one of the gaps in Gilgamesh. So that's where the restoration there is kind of imagined. It's not certain, so it's sort of conjectural. One thing you might note here is there's a kind of slightly antiquated feel to the language, which is not uncommon in these translations. And to me, there's a slightly Victorian stamp I'm hearing here, I think, and slightly hectoring as well. It's in those words like harries and warrant and teeming. And you could say that the Victorian tone which haunts this translation is appropriate because that's the era in which the epic was rediscovered. But I think it's also true to say that whatever the truth of that, it's a tone which is quite flat to contemporary ears. Another example of the same passage from the pioneering version by N.K. Sanders. This was published in 1960 as the 100th Penguin Classic. It was based on line-by-line scholarly translations. Is as follows. Same passage. This is in prose. And it's the second on your handout. "Gilgamesh sounds the tocsin for his amusement. His arrogance has no bounds, day or night. No son is left with his father, for Gilgamesh takes them all. yet the king should be a shepherd to his people. Now, I would want to argue against those dual tendencies in translation, that first of all, the fragmentary nature of Gilgamesh is an integral and fascinating part of its material and arguably symbolic existence, and one which, as the easily damaged clay tablets continue to be damaged in conflicts today, links the history of this ancient text to the history of the present. In other words, echoing the title of this conference, the dislocations in the text find their counterpart in our own dislocated times. And secondly, I would want to argue also that while we don't know for certain the register of Gilgamesh, there is, given the nature of its content, which is often violent and often mocking and satirical and very often sexually explicit, there's no reason to assume that it should be translated into a very elevated language, such as would typically be used for translating Virgilian epic, and nothing to say it shouldn't be translated into a much more idiomatic and earthy language, such as, for example, you might find in François Villon and translators of Villon. Here, the kind of thing I have in the back of my mind here is Stephen Rodfer's magnificent, slangy yet very measured translations of François Villon. And you'll see a bit of this also on your handout from Stephen Rodfer, writing under the pseudonym of Jean Calais. This is the late Stephen Rodfer, and I think these are magnificent translations. There's one rude word towards the end, which I will quote from Rodfer, but it's necessary for the Villon. To begin with, I know that I'm not in the galaxy of people an angel, nor is my mother, poor woman, so I'm not even a son of an angel. My father, God save him, is dead. His body slumbers on under some rock. My mother will go soon, and she knows it too, and following her, I'll make the trip myself not long after to check the view. I don't really think my life's been wasted on too much drinking and fucking. At any rate, I have never sold out for love. So what this line of thinking might begin to look like applied to Gilgamesh, you can perhaps get some inkling of by considering the little-known fragments of Gilgamesh completed by the American poet Charles Olson, and which he entitled Bigmans, and which incidentally also pay homage to the fragmentary nature of the epic by maintaining gaps, and it's a practice which simultaneously picks up on late Romantic and modernist poetics, where the fragment has a powerful legacy. This is the next quote in your handout, which is a little bit from Olson. Arouse yourself, big mans, arouse. Cities, things, crumples of tin and dead men in big mans, start moving, start the next heave, leave your mother's fire, your brothers have had enough derisions, despotus, of many filths, though fructuous. Take to the streets, big mans, to the streets, go, to the whore, begin, she is Sib, wrong boy. That's he only did very small fragments, but I think what he did do is very rich and full of a kind of life that breathes a sort of new, more contemporary life into these very ancient texts. And to get on with my story, following this line of argument, the versioning I was doing of this was begins with the decision, first of all, to maintain rather than to disguise the fragmentary nature of the text. So it's full of lots of blanks and sort of marks and bits where you can't read anything. So it's partly visual, and in doing so, it allows kind of modernist poetic styles to play a part in the telling. And secondly, it tries to avoid the flat and neutral style that is often common of translations, and which Olson's is in this respect, the exception that proves the rule in some ways. And yet, the question remains, what kind of language should you translate Gilgamesh into? And I think those of you who were here yesterday will have heard Matthew read out various and prismatic translations of a single Arabic text, showing how you can do one text in lots of different voices. But so, what voice should you translate Gilgamesh into? In a way, this is difficult, if not, I think, probably impossible to answer, as the truth is that we don't really know how the original would have sounded. And so any decision to use one particular idiom, therefore, over another risks being arbitrary. And there's a fantastic version by Edwin Morgan, Scottish poet, who does it into Scottish dialect, which I particularly like and is particularly effective. Now, translating into Scottish dialect will not seem arbitrary to Edwin Morgan, but it could seem arbitrary to someone who wasn't Scottish. But it works particularly well, and it brings a kind of idiomatic life into the poem that is rarely found. And yet there does seem to be some evidence for the use of idiomatic language in the poem. Quite a lot of people have written about this. Benjamin Foster, for example, notes that while tone and usage in such ancient texts are hazardous topics, he says, that in Tablet 6, line 72, Ishulanu, a gardener, appears to use non-standard forms, and this happens elsewhere in the poem. These non-standard forms there, Foster says, could be translated as proverbial, or could be translated as archaic, such as "hath my mother not baked," which is a sort of proverbial thing, or you could translate that as a kind of more colloquialism, and he puts it as "ain't my mother baked." So there are different sounds to those, and it shows how you can take it in different directions, but also that there may be some evidence here for colloquialisms in the poem. As often with my writing, it was Oulipo, or the Ouvroir de Littérature Potentielle, Workshop of Potential Literature, founded in 1960 by François Le Lyonnais and Raymond Queneau, 1960, the same date that the Penguin Classic version of Gilgamesh appeared, which suggested a solution. And that solution was to make use of a constraint, namely the idea of translating into the limited vocabulary of Globish. So I'll say a little bit about that now. Constraints are usually at their most effective when they're precisely not arbitrary. Well, they can be arbitrary, but they're best when they're not arbitrary, but there's some kind of logic at work there. Some kind of aesthetic rationale. And you get this, there's a novel by Paul Griffiths, which is a retelling of Ophelia's story in Hamlet, and it's called Let Me Tell You, and in that novel he uses only the words that Shakespeare gives to Ophelia in the play. And so you can see there's a kind of logic there. And it's all the more effective for that. Perrec's famous Elis novel, La Disparition, also there's a logic for him not using ease in that novel, not least because it's a novel about disappearances. And this was also the case here. So why is Globish relevant here? Globish is primarily a business language, and so it seemed appropriate to use this to translate cuneiform, which itself as a script emerged as from the need to record business transactions. So, so many bushels of wheat, so many jars of wine you would mark down with your pointy stick. Moreover, just as Jean-Paul Nerrière considered Globish the world dialect of the third millennium, so Akkadian, the language of the standard text of Gilgamesh, as in R. Campbell Thompson's text of 1930, Akkadian was for a long time the lingua franca of international communications in the Near East. That is the language which was used as a common tongue amongst peoples who didn't share a tongue. You can get a good sense of the business orientation of Globish if I just read you out some of the first 20 words. So you have an, able, about, above, accept, accident, account, across, act, add, administration, admit, adult, advertise, advise, after, again, against, agency, and aggression. Aggression, of course, is the one thing which really underpins business, I think. So business communities are always at war with each other, and they always have plans, drives to overtake things and drive other people out of business. So I think the underpinning metaphor of business is one of war. I'm slowly and rather sadly coming to understand. Worth noting in passing here also is the coincidence that the first word in Globish, which is not but is An, A-N, is also the name of the Sumerian sky god who appears in the epic, and therefore the only god who in this particular version you can mention by name. The link between script and language and business, of which I'm talking in a minute, is also there in the substance of the epic. For here, as in other epics such as the Iliad, as Christa Wolf and others have argued, as with the Tame, the Irish epic, where events are precipitated by the theft of a bull, there's an underpinning theme which is fundamentally about trade and exchange. Here the trade in Gilgamesh is for hardwood, or some would say for pine, and access to forests for what was then an important building material, and still is to some extent. So access to forests for building materials, something which again links this epic to the present, and to more recent wars in and around Iraq, where these tales originally come from. The commodity in question today not being wood, but obviously oil. The results of this method you can see for yourself in a moment when I'll read you some bits of it, but I'll try and summarise them first, and they are as follows. One result, because of the limited vocabulary of Globish, was the use of a lot of periphrasis, so saying things in a roundabout way. So Uruk, the sheepfold, where Gilgamesh comes from, it becomes big city of the animal noise. The is the only word you can use there. And the bull of heaven there was no word for bull in Globish, so you have to get a bull by, they've got cows, so you have to turn it into man cow. So the man cow of the sky rather than the bull of heaven. There's no heaven. It's a godless world, obviously, this business world. There's no heaven, there's only a sky. It sounds a bit like John Lennon there for a moment. But, and so on. And incidentally, the centrality of the bull of heaven in the narrative, as well as the centrality of issues linked to male virility in the narrative, which there are lots, also suggests to me that this is not only our first epic, but also our first kind of another story, which is usually called a cock and bull story, because this is a cock and bull story, as Tristram Shandy also announced itself as a cock and bull story. And I think you could also argue that Tame is also one of these, more obviously. The limitations of Globish made other things difficult to translate directly to, so that often there was a kind of updating, an unavoidable updating. So it's a bit like doing Shakespeare in contemporary dress at times, and with the substitution of contemporary terms which are inevitably anachronistic. And some of these words include nuclear, rocket, helicopter, magazine, car, cell phone, brand, retirement, and so on. And here the substitution resembled more the kind of operation of the dream work in a way than sort of one-to-one direct translation. As a result, the final text frequently has a sense of the clash of ancient and modern. It's a clash which is not inappropriate in a text which is about cultural encounters, notably of culture and the wild. And it also incorporates a clash of different registers, a kind of linguistic dialogism, so it moves between the formal and the informal. It's not that global itself is particularly idiomatic, it's not, but with the words of Globish, you can subvert them and use them to string together sentences that are quite idiomatic. For among others, get with, spit it out, you can say that, throw up, face it, and man done is even conjurable from Globish. This particular quality emerged almost by chance and like a spark, though in some ways I think it's quite typical of texts that use a limited vocabulary because they have to squeeze the maximum out of the few words they've got. But it was a quality I definitely teased at and worked for whenever I could. And it's also it's something which links back to the work of Roddifer for me, and also to the New York School of Poets. And it's one of the effects you find in their work. It was also an effect, albeit one used with infinite restraint, that I had admired in Alice Oswald's excavation of Homer Memorial, where towards the end of the poem she writes, "To stand in full armour in the doorway, like a man rushing and leaving his motorbike running." The appropriateness of this clash of registers to a version of Gilgamesh in particular is confirmed by Marina Warner's comments when she writes that in 1872 George Smith, I quote, delivered a paper to the Society for Biblical Archaeology and read out the account of the flood from the epic. This was the first time the epic of Gilgamesh had been heard and understood after an interval of 2,000 years, the longest sleep ever among the world's great poems. The work's interrupted chronology, so different from the destinies of the Upanishads or even Homer, gives Gilgamesh a double history as an ancient epic and as a modern narrative poem. So finally a word about the sort of metric of Gilgamesh. According to Andrew George, because of the variable nature of the sign cuneiform, some signs are, for example, syllabic, whereas some represent whole words. Line length, which, as I understand it, is defined by the width of the tablet column, is extremely variable when translated. So the line can comprise 3, 4, 5, or even 6 units, and each of these units in themselves, while having one central word, can be completely variable in syllabic length. So to adopt a metaphor, the line might be said to be explosive, and like a cluster bomb, you're never quite sure how many explosions you are going to get. So those explosions become unpredictable. On the one hand, this arrangement gives a very free line, as in modern free verse. On the other hand, it maintains a structure in that it is built up of a discrete number of units. And in this, it's a peculiar, but also it's a metric which has its parallels in modern poetry, notably in Mallarmé's and Coup de Dé, Throw of the Dice, as Quentin Meillassoux has described it in his book The Number and the Siren. He talks about Mallarmé squaring the circle of free and fixed verse forms, because the poem looks about as free as you can get, but the number 12, which underpins French verse, is there everywhere you look, and is used in multiples and combinations. To achieve a similar effect, I adopted a flexible line, sometimes short, though more often longer, which shows something to lots of other poets who've written in long lines, from Whitman to Ginsberg to Anne Carson more recently. And that was combined with an arrangement I found in the work of the poet Richard Parker. And he's a writer who's invented his own line, where the line is divided into 2 syllable units using a vertical bar every second syllable. That often cuts words in half. Here's an example of the Parker line from the opening of his beautiful science fiction, epic science fiction poem, called The Traveller in the Defence of Heaven, which, curiously, like the quote I started from, also has the Victorian certain words in it. Maybe that idea of adventure. The adventurous spirit is tied in our imaginations to Victorian time. And this is the last quote, I think, on your handout, Richard Parker. Brusquely, Renger, at the rocket controls. Our sun is dead. The sky, once a seat for angels, rains down fires more like devils. The sun, no more, the crown of heaven, but loud, evil, raining meteors that from sky brook no caverns. So used in translating Gilgamesh, this practice had the added benefit of invoking the ghostly presence of cuneiform in its sort of angular marks, and also increasing a sense of the fragmentary, because it fragments the words. And also introducing a level of uncertainty and unfamiliarity to the decipherment of the line. So there's kind of re-estrangement going on here, which takes us back to that moment of troublesome first encounter with an unknown text, such as George Smith would have had when visiting the British Museum in his lunch hour and looking at the flood tablets on display. He was actually trying to work out how to read them. So I'll read from this. I'll read from this in a second. Just to sum up, it's my hope as the language of business increasingly gains an insidious foothold in every corner of life, that in translating Gilgamesh using business English, I'm able to steal some poetry back from the world of business, which for a long time now has been stealing from poetry's rhyming advertising slogans, at least since there's one of these recorded in Joyce's Ulysses, famously, and it's still going on today. What is home without plum trees, potted meat, incomplete, with it an abode of bliss is the one Joyce remembers, which kind of encapsulates his whole novel in a way. At the same time, this stealing back of poetry from business mirrors the original poetic act, whereby the poetry of Gilgamesh was written out of an emergent language script which had its origins in business transactions. And there's a final point here which I think relates to loss and destruction. Tamim, in his wonderful talk yesterday, mentioned how Arabic poetry, if I understood this correctly, substitutes words or lives in words, and substitutes words for the loss of a home or the loss of loved ones. And I hear the threatened loss is, I think, that everything that lies outside business becomes annihilated. And by wresting poetry out of this business language, there's an attempt to arrest that process. Are we okay for time?
Yes.
I'm going to read, yes, I'll move over there. So, yeah, I'll read you some little bits of this, just to clear the passages. Forgive me. Okay. We're okay? Yes. I'll begin with the opening 3 columns of tablet 1. Here I call this not. This is stone 1 rather than stone 1, cut 1 to 3. So that the first, it's the opening of tablet 1 in the first 3 columns. I think these are fairly self-explanatory, and it's very close to the original. A few words in the text, because this is partly visual. There are lots of sort of crosses where there's nothing there. I think where that happens, there'll be a brief pause. But I've chosen bits which have more words and not too many gaps, because I think that's better for a reading. Otherwise, I'd just be silent. There are other bits where the meaning's uncertain, so it's sort of under erasure with a line through it. I don't know how to do that. I haven't done this before, but I'm going to try whispering that. There aren't many of them. I'll try whispering those. But if that doesn't work, I'll just stop and read. But you'll see. So this is just the story of Gilgamesh. It's not wildly changed by doing all those things I've been talking about, strangely enough. So you'll recognise it. Stone 1, cut 1. I will sing of the one who see the bottom. Of he who know all, I will tell the story in the old way, from beginning to end, the wise one. He who know everything, dictator, who see the secret thing that no man see before, open the secret place that no man opened before, and bring back word of the time before the great wave. He travelled the long road, tired out in pain, and cut he work in stone. He built the strong wall of big city of the animal noise, the wall of the holy church of the woman sex, place of peace. Look hard at the wall, the top be like steel, examine the inside wall which no town can equal. Touch the stone door frame, old as the mountain, come near the holy church, home of the woman sex god, a building no dictator can match to this day. Climb the wall of big city of the animal noise, take a walk round the top, examine the base, look at the perfect brickwork, straight and true, clock that even the centre is of good fire brick. As for the base, be it not set down by a wise man, one part be city, one part fruit tree, one part vine. 3 parts together with the mine make up big city of the animal noise. Find the metal box full of cut stone, slide open the steel lock, lift the catch that hold the secret, take out the blue stone and read it out loud. How dictator suffer every hardship, overpower the enemy, the powerful other, strong one, child of big city of the animal noise, powerful man cow. He stand in the front like a fearless man, he march at the back as a brother, a nuclear weapon to protect the army. He'd be the great wave that break down the wall, son of big city of the animal noise, dictator be the blueprint of power, child of wild cow, he mother, dictator, beautiful like a jewel in the dark. He opened the mountain pass, dig the deep well on the mountainside, build the powerful rockets. He travel across the sea to where the sun god rise, travel to the edge of the world to find the secret of life. He find a way to the one who find life, the one off the map, the man who bring back life when the great wave destroy it, fill the land again with people. From the day of his birth, they called dictator by name. Dictator, dictator. Be there a man like he anywhere, who, like dictator, can say, I am all powerful. This is cut, stone 1, cut 2, so the next bit. 2 parts of he be God, 1 part man. The woman's sex god, design or shape the form of he body. She give to me every gift. Over big city of the animal noise, he turn he eye. Like a wild man cow that stand tall, head held high. When he fire, he rocket, he have no equal. Then the enemy burn, he people awake to battle noise. Dictator take the sun from the fire, through the holy place he run wild with the young blade of the city. Day and night he make the weak suffer, day and night he torture the enemy. dictator who govern over big city of the animal noise. Be this the one we want to lead us, strong, bright, full of wisdom. Dictator, forbid the young woman to go to the mother, the girl, young, love, the young woman to the husband. He get with the young wife before she husband. That God hear the cry, the God of the above speak to Anne, the sky god who protect the city. Is it you that make this wild, mighty man camp? When he fire, he rocket, he had no equal. Then the enemy burn, he people awake to battle noise. Dictator, keep the sun from the father day and night he torture, he enemy with waterboard. Be this the man to govern big city of the animal noise? Be this the one to lead the people, strong, bright, full of wisdom? Dictator, forbid the young woman to go to the mother, the girl to the one she loved, the young woman to the husband, he get with the young wife before she husband. When the sky god Anne hear the people cry, he called to the great mother, you mother, who create man, create now a second dictator. May they be equal or opposite in spirit and heart. May they fight against each other so the big city of the animal noise may have quiet. When the great mother hear this, she make a picture of Anne, the sky god, and she heart. Then the great mother wash she hand, take up a ball of wet earth and throw it into the wild. In the wild she make wild man the battlefield. She give birth in dark and silence to one like the god of war. He whole body be covered with thick hair, he head be covered with hair like a woman. The lock of his hair grow fast and thick like the hair of the woman called God. He know neither family or homeland. He dress like the cow god, he feed with the wild horse on grass, with the wild animal he drink at the water hole, with the busy animal he heart grow light in the water. The man who hunt and kill animal, cat catch, meeting at the water hole. One day, a second, and then a third, cat catch come across wild man at the water hole. When he see wild man, he body freeze. When he see wild man, he hand freeze. When he see wild man, he eye freeze. Wild man and the animal together make the thing that be not welcome. Cat catch sense trouble. He worry. He go quiet. He heart hurt. He face grow dark. The sad thing enter. He heart. He face be like that of a man who travelled a long road at night. Stone one cut through. This is a little bit more about this hunter figure. Cat catch. Cat catch obviously is not in Globish, but cat is and catches. So I did a few compounds and allowed myself that liberty. Cat catch, shape he mouth and move he tongue to speak, he say to he father, Father, a man come from the mountain in strength, no one in all the land can equal, he power be like a battle star of Anne, the sky god, all day and night he go about the mountain, all day and night. He climb among the tree all day and night. He feed on grass with the animal all day and night. He leave footprint and footprint
round the deep water hole. Out of fear I cannot go up to he. He fill up the hole I dig with my hand. He tear out the tripwire I fix. He help the animal slip through my finger. He help the cat return to the forest. I cannot hunt in the wild either day or night. The father shapey mouth and movie tongue to speak. He say to cat catch, son, in big city of the animal noise there live a powerful man they call dictator. In strength no one in all the land can equal he. He power be like a battle star of the sky god. Go, follow the road sign in the direction of big city of the animal noise. May he who know all give you an ear. He will say, go, cat catch, and take with you a hotel girl, top shelf woman. She will win, wild man with girl power, power equal and opposite to he own. When he take the animal to the water hole, have the woman take off she skirt, have the woman take off she silk shirt, have the woman show how beautiful she be. When he see her open she leg, he will come near the animal from the wild, will run away and desert he. All ear, cat catch listen to the word of his father, and so he set off to find dictator. He climbed the hill and followed the road sign in the direction of big city of the animal noise, to speak to dictator with big head. A wild man come from in strength, no one in all the land can equal he. He power be like the battle star of Han, the sky god. All day and night he go about the mountain, all day and night he climb among the tree, all day and night he feed on grass with the animal, all day and night he leave footprint and footprint round the deep water hole. Out of fear I cannot go up to him. He fill up the hole I dig with my hand. He tear out the trip wire I fix in the earth. He help the animal slip through my finger. He help the wild cat return to the forest. I cannot hunt in the wild either day or night. Dictator, make of his mouth a shape. Say to cat catch, go, cat catch, and take with you a hotel girl, a top shelf woman. When you take the animal to the water hole, have the woman take off she skirt, have the woman take off she silk shirt, have the woman show how beautiful she be. When he see her open she leg, he will come near, the animal from the wild will run away and desert him. Cat catch go, he take with him a hotel girl, a top shelf woman. They climb the long road, travel into the wild. On the third day in the wild, they arrive at the place. Cat catch and the woman sit at the water hole and wait like a camera crew. One day, second day, they sit silent at the water hole. Then, on the third day, the wild animal come to the water hole to drink. And I'll move quite a bit forward now and read you some little sections from later on in the epic. This next section is after the death of Enkidu, so after the death of Wild Man. Gilgamesh, in despair at the loss of his friend, goes on a long journey, and he goes to find Ur-Shanabi, the sort of Noah figure of the story, who he thinks will be able to give him eternal life, because that's what Ur-Shanabi himself was granted after he survived the flood. So this is stone 10, cut 1, tablet 10, column 1, and it describes the point of the journey where Gilgamesh reaches an inn on the edge of the sea before he travels across the sea.
And I think one thing about the language of Gilgamesh is that so a lot of the scenes are based on puns and double meanings. A word which means one thing to one group of people is something, another thing to another group of people. Difficult to translate that kind of thing, but there's an attempt to do that here in the word bar is a word which underpins this passage and which does have a similar double meaning. So bar as in bar that is open, a public house, but bar also as in a prison bar or you're barred. Which is why I chose to read this, which is quite short. Stone Axe, cut 1. Hope, the bar girl, from the house at the lip of the sea, she mixed the drink, she held the glass, she opened the bottle, poured the beer, she wear a paper hat, she smoked, she smiled. Dictator, walk to the bar, he wear animal hide, have the skin of a god on his body, pain in the bread basket, he look like a bad mother, he face like that of a man who travelled far. The bar girl look in the distance, she say to sheself, where he walked to this man, maybe this one he had to kill. When she see him come, she bar the door, she turn the key, she shut the lock fast. Dictator, he see it all. Dictator, he hear it all. He lift he big stick, set he body before the door. Dictator, move he tongue to speak. He say to the bar girl, what do you see that make you shut the lock? Why do you turn the key? Why do you bar the door? Speak, or I will smash down the door and break the lock. The bar girl, she speak to Dictator. Why you look like you waste away? Why you face like ruin? Why ill luck enter you heart, enter you eye, pain be in you bread basket? You face like that of a man who travel far. You face be weather by hot and cold because you travel the wild after a bag of wind. Dictator, open your mouth to speak to hope the bar girl. Bar girl, it be not that ill luck enter I heart. It be not that ill luck enter I eye. It be not the pain in I bread basket. Not for that do I travel the wild after a bag of wind, but because of a friend, a brother who hunt the wild horse, the wild cat of the valley. Wild man, one I love, who hunt the wild horse, the wild cat. We overpower all. We climb the mountain, catch and kill the man-cow of the sky. Bring tree guard who live in the forest to the end. Bring culture to the wild. Bring hardwood to the city. In the mountain gate we kill the wild pig. And this is the famous section of the flood. This is a story told by Ocean Abbey, the one who fired life. I call it the Noah. It's become one of the most exciting parts of the epic when it was discovered in the West, because it was thought to prefigure a flood in the Bible. Stone 11 cut through, and then 2 tiny little bits from the very end, and we're done. When a finger of light begin to appear, a black cloud rise up from the distance. From within it, the storm god cry out loud. The god of ruin and the god of control run before it. They move like an enemy helicopter over the mountain and the land. The god of the underworld break, he doorframe. The son of the war god come, he make the river past the back.
The many judge of the God lift up and shine they light. The land shine bright under the radiation. The cancer of the storm God eat up the sky. Turn all that be light to dark. The wide land smash like a wine glass. For one whole day the south wind blow, it tear up the tree and the building, it throw the car up in the air, it throw the condominium to the ground, even the chapel and the motel fall to the ground. It gather speed and explode on the mountain, lay the tree flat like grass, like a nuclear winter that stretch over everything, all go dark. Brother cannot see. Brother, from the sky no one can see the people at all. The big water frighten even the God. They run off back to the home of the sky god, and each God like a dog in a basket lying outside the door. Oh, we've done. Can I just read one tiny passage from here? I'll cut that one.
Can we just stop while we get people sitting down?
Sure.
There are some chairs over there, so we're walking up Marina. Sorry, just a bit.
There you go. You got them?
This is the final page. Okay, everyone settled? I'll more or less stop now. I just want to read you one tiny little passage from the end, which is a passage about the underworld, partly because that's been such a rich, there'll be so many epics which have been rich passages set in the underworld. Eni recently posthumously released the six-part book of the Aeneid, which is Aeneas's voyage to the underworld. And so I think this is, like the flood, this is a key passage. So here, this is a kind of coda to the epic that some people don't include in it, because it's a bit weird, because here Enkidu springs back to life suddenly, and then Gilgamesh is playing a toy, which is a kind of ball and stick game, according to a lot of people. And then he loses part of this and falls through the floorboards into the underworld. And then Enkidu gallantly offers to go and rescue us for him, and ends up in the underworld, where of course he can't get back from the underworld, but his spirit is eventually released. The spirit of Enkidu, the wild man, and Gilgamesh talk to each other about the underworld, so it kind of prefigures those conversations between Dante and Virgil in the Inferno. So here's just a page of this. I'll cut it. Stone 12, cut 4 and 5. Tell it straight, friend. Tell dictator the way of the underworld. I will not tell you now. I will not tell you what I see. If I must tell you the way of the underworld, get ready to sit down and cry. I will sit down and cry. I body that make you heart happy to touch. Animal, eat it all up like horse meat. I body that make you heart happy to touch, turn to dirt. Dictator cry out and throw himself to the earth. He throw himself in the dirt and say, do you see the man who have no son? I do. He And do you see the one who died all of a sudden of a bad heart? Do you see this man? I do. He sleep at night on a soft bed and drink pure water. The one cut down in battle, do you see this man? I do. He father raised he head and he wife looked after he dead body. The neighbour who become angry when a tree grow over he fence. Do you see this man? I do. In the underworld he live in darkness, he drink dirty water from an outside toilet. The one they throw onto the wasteland, do you see this man? I do. His spirit do not rest in peace in the underworld. The shade of no one left in the world to love. Do you see this one? I do. The leftover potato, the leftover burger bun that people throw in the dirt that no dead dog will touch, he eats. So I'll stop there. Thank you. So I think we're okay for time?
Yes,
we have time for some questions.
We've got quite a long lunch period.
Okay.
We built in. It's fine.
Okay.
Fine. So we can thank you very, very much. Really wonderful. I think your solution to the whisper is extraordinary. Works really well, and also the reporting.
I haven't read from that before, actually.
Because you showed me an early draft of it, so I've seen it on the page. You've done a lot of work, I think, since then. I mean, it's very, very
going over it, it keeps
yes.
suddenly started to come alive.
So, questions or comments, do ask things.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I thought that was magnificent and really amazing. My question has to do with, I don't know how much flexibility there is in the grammar and morphology of Globish, and I would be interested in knowing that. Because one of the things that I found really fascinating was the way, the tonality of it, where the verb forms that you're using, you know, it's both a third-person narrative, but there's a real quality of imperative to it, which is very forceful. And it seems to be both, you know, and I really like that, but I wondered, was that a choice you made, or was that also partly due to the limitation of the way the language works?
I think it was almost entirely due to the limitations of Globish, so you can't, none of the verbs are inflected, so you just get these infinitives. You've got to use, so go. You can't say he goes, you just say he go. And but it also sounds a bit like a kind of pidgin English, although that can't have been the intention, which I quite like. So it's slightly wrong English and slightly rough English, but you can still feel your way through it. But that imperative is entirely imposed in a way, because it's one of the few options you have. But obviously it's good. It's appropriate for a sort of bossy Gilgamesh figure to use that. So it's one of those lucky coincidences that you hope will happen in this sort of thing. And, yeah.
Well, you're very choices, because in fact I think Christopher Logue in his trial he uses he or the she cow, the she. He uses he and she to do what you did with man cow.
Okay.
And man cow is more powerful than he cow, I think. So you've actually, there are things that you've done that have more.
Yeah, so I could have done he. I mean, I know that I haven't read the Logue recently, but I have read it in the past, so it will have gone in there somewhere. And it's a wonderful work. Also working from a language he doesn't know.
I think he uses she god, for example.
Okay.
But anyway, yes.
Yes, thank you very much. I felt that was kind of somehow very powerful and also comic at the same time, that kind of juxtaposition.
Yeah, and I think there is inevitably a kind of comic thing that happens with different registers coming together.
And it kind of, it felt like almost something from the future trying to translate something ancient. I kind of got this sense that it was almost like the voice. I mean, you read it brilliantly, but I almost felt the voice could be one of those automated voices you get in a station or down a telephone or something.
Yeah.
Just try to find the right word for something.
Yeah. I haven't quite got used to reading this. I haven't read this before, and so I was sort of feeling my way into it as we went. But I think Gilgamesh. I mean, Marina's told me about puppet versions of Gilgamesh, which is entirely appropriate for. There's a sort of Punch and Judy thing going on in Gilgamesh, so, which is again reminds one of cartoons. So to think this is a cartoon element or a puppetry element, I think is entirely appropriate, and I think it's been adapted into different forms and travels well as a story and to different kinds of performance and different kinds of telling.
Is there a struggle for you about levels of intensity? Because I was thinking as you were reading about Seamus Heaney's Sweeney, where there's a whole lot of narrative about the sort of basic stuff about getting people to one place or another, and then there are evocations and rhetorical kind of bursts, and he sort of he changes gear.
Right, so it's kind of prose
ups the ante. Yeah, so
poetry.
it's as if it's moving between kind of the prosaic and the poetic.
Yeah.
And obviously his text that he's translated gives him that.
Yeah.
So in the Gilgamesh fragments, presumably there's no difference of emphasis or intensity at any point. And and Glovish is flattening, clearly. I mean, it's got a flattening issue.
Yes.
So as you were reading, I was wondering whether you had been struggling with the idea that certain bits need to be more intense than others, and whether you'd had to sacrifice that kind of sense of contrast. You said this is the most exciting bit in the poem, and it is exciting, but actually linguistically it wasn't any different from the other stuff that you were reading.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, and as far as I know, the form, with minor variations, the form remains pretty much the same all the way through. And there are different versions of Gilgamesh from different cultures who use slightly different forms. And then when it comes in English, you know, the Penguin that comes out in 1960 is a prose version, so that would have been the first one that people in this country read. Would have been like a, you know, prose odyssey or something, like the E.V. I'd never known how to pronounce that name. The first Penguin Odyssey was a prose odyssey, and as with the Iliad. And I think, I don't know. I mean, I haven't. It is the same all the way through. Is the short answer to your question. And I'm aware of the Sweeney stories and what Heaney does with them, and I think it's quite nice to have that transition of a move from prose, where there's a more informational thing, and then a slightly more heightened moment. I think inevitably in any poem there are, as in any piece of music, there are lulls and then there are slightly more intense bits. And I think you do get this in Gilgamesh, as I understand it, but what you also get is a flatness, and you also get a sense, as you'll have got from some of the bits I read, which made it quite long, there's endless repetition of whole passages as a scene is repeated, talked to one person and then it's communicated to another person. And so it kind of revels in this repetition and this going over the stuff again and again. So in a kind of wordiness that slows things down in a way that I love, actually. I really like that repetition. And I don't know why, but I do, and that's really quite flat, isn't it? But it seems to be a feature of the thing. It's famously a feature of all oral poetry that you have repeated bits because it's easier to remember, I suppose, is one argument. But so that flatness is something I'm aware of that I'm liking, but I'm also thinking you can't write the whole thing can't be flat. So I was trying to make some bits a little bit more colourful. The ways I'm trying to do that are not by doing prose and poetry, but I think where there are more references to contemporary culture, you add more colours. So when you start talking about motels and condominiums during the flood, that adds an extra colour to that bit, which to me slightly heightens it. I don't know if that works, but that's what's trying to happen there. Yeah? That's the best I can answer that one, but it's an interesting question, certainly.
Can I just come up with a sort of an alternate take on what you've just said? Because though the text was, you could say, possibly levelled out, his performance increasingly was absolutely not. And what was being brought by voice and body, and as you got more and more into it, was supplementing the word in the way that we always miss the presence of the body in the word, and particularly when studying epic, we try to make the written word do what the body actually is doing, and you saw it happening to him. It was absolutely wonderful that from how it started, and then about 2/3 of the way through, a completely different embodiment.
Children first,
I don't know if it expresses very well, but my experience of reading actually was that there were moments of kind of greater intensity, and that came where you were kind of scrabbling, well, when the listener was sort of scrabbling for interpretation, when the text kind of became more substitutionary, and you had those amazing things, like you said, top shelf living, or just like when you had to be roundabout. And for me, those were the moments of greater intensity, just because you were further away and you were sort of striving. So, but maybe they were flattened out again by the repetition, so that was part of it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, actually, you need to see this. So that's a page of it. You could pass it around, because actually, when you read it, it's much weirder because you've got all these gaps and the words are all separated out. So it's a bit puzzle. Every line is slightly puzzle-like when you read this, and you're not really getting that. It's hard to communicate that when you read it out loud. So that element of that element you're mentioning there, that there's a moment where you have to concentrate to work out what's happening, is heightened in the written text in a way that it's not necessarily when you perform it. Partly because it's always slowing things down, and you need a bit of speed at some points of a performance. But I was trying to render that at the beginning, certainly the slightly choppy thing. But thank you for that.
Thank you, yes.
Sheila. It's just responding to the embodied way in which you told the story. And I listened to a lot of it with my eyes closed. And what kept coming to mind was cartoon. You know, the sort of fragmented, but also the sort of power and the sort of sculpted bodies. And of course, then when you had Top Shelf Girl, I mean, it was just a kind of archaic, perhaps 50s, 60s kind of comic language, talking about something much more archaic. So,
I mean, if comics are coming to mind, that's certainly the sort of thing that comes to my mind.
Yeah.
When I think of this.
Definitely with eyes closed. And the other thing that came very much to mind was the repetition.
But it's quite fun. There's a fun in that repetition, actually.
Great fun, a lot of fun, cartoon, and that another traditional ways of storytelling. I mean, the particular one I'm studying is a manui, which is an Ewe, Ghana and Togo Ewe traditional story, which is entirely based upon repetition and gesture. It's the story of the trip or the story of the news. So but it's every day. You know, children are asked to give the story of the trip. So it doesn't have to just be a competent storyteller. That's interesting.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, I think it has to be the last question.
Very quick question about the word God. You said there are gods in Polish, but there is the word God, or did you choose to put that in?
I think I said there was no heaven, but actually I could be wrong about that.
Whilst you were speaking, I was trying to imagine, like, to tell a story without, many stories without the word God, what would put in instead?
Yeah, I think they didn't have the word heaven. That's all. So I think what would normally be rendered as heaven, I had to go for something else, and I think sky was the only word available. That's all I was saying, and I think what I would suggest. I mean, Gilgamesh is full of gods. They're always getting involved in things, and on the whole, they're quite a nice bunch. The gods, ancient Mesopotamian gods, certainly more acceptable than people who run modern businesses. And I think what I was suggesting, that the modern business world is a rather godless one, and a storyless one. A story only exists if it's a story that for profit in a way.
And his and hers didn't exist. He, she,
Yeah, it doesn't have has his or her. So you have to find a clumsy way around that.
That's very interesting in terms of business, isn't it?
Well, you'd think the opposite would be true, but what's true of Globish is not necessarily true of business. So one of Globish's aims is to cut down the language to a minimum. So if people keep adding to it, which kind of defeats the purpose. But I did make use of those additions. In fact, I used burger bun, and that only exists in late editions. But I couldn't resist that. Yeah. If you look online, there are plenty of sites that give you a repository of Globish from different eras because it keeps getting adapted. But
But the word God exists in Globish.
Oh, it does.
No, it's a question.
No, I don't think it does.
Okay.
But it might do. Oh, it is there. Okay, well, it is there. Yeah, but the names of the Mesopotamian gods don't exist. I think I can say with confidence. Yeah.
Well, I think we should thank Phil very much.
Thank you, and thank you.